Hi everyone, I'm Katrina, and today I'll be talking about how to judge APDA. I'm a Tufts dino. I graduated from Tufts in 2023 after doing 4 years of primarily APDA, but also a little bit of BP. And I have judged entirely too many rounds, both in my time on the league and after I graduated as a dino. So I'll be talking about a couple of things today. I'll be going through the very basics of what an APDA round looks like for people who are maybe a little less familiar. I'll be talking about some of the weird nuances that APDA has with its judging, and then how APDA is judged, how we come to a call, how ranks and speaks work, and how creating and giving an RFD or reason for decision to teams in the round works. So what does an APDA round look like? Whether you're judging motions or cases debate, APDA rounds are going to have the same basic structure. First, they're going to have three speeches from each side. First is going to be the Prime Minister's Constructive, or PMC, which is a 7-minute, 30-second grace speech. Then Leader of Opposition's Constructive, or LOC, is 8 minutes, 30 seconds grace. Member of Government and Member of Opposition both speak, also give 8-minute, 30-second grace speeches. And then we have the two rebuttal speeches of the round, which are the Leader of Opposition's rebuttal, the LOR, which is 4 minutes and 30 seconds grace, as well as the PMR, Prime Minister's rebuttal, which is 5 minutes, 30 seconds grace. Notably, every other speech can make new arguments except for rebuttal speeches, where new arguments are not allowed, and other teams will frequently call them out. What are the responsibilities of judging in APDA? First, let's talk about chairing, winging, and paneling. What's the difference here, and does this really matter? Chairing rounds means that you are the person who's in charge of giving the decision for the round to teams, and you are also in charge of leading deliberation if there are other judges who are judging with you. In rounds, frequently when tournaments have more than enough judges, chair judges will get wing judges assigned to them. On tab, the chair judge will be in bold, and any wings will be not in bold on tab. Notably, chair judges in rounds have final say on calls, and wings are non-voting, sort of like a trainee in BP. They don't actually get a vote, but they get to participate in discussion. Occasionally, tournaments will have voting wings in rounds, but they will make that very clear to you. And I would typically assume that if you're a wing in rounds, we're probably not actually voting on the decision, but you are talking to the chair judge, who is usually someone who's either a pretty experienced varsity judge or a dino who's come back to judge. And you'll be coming to a call with them and sort of learning from them how they create calls. Paneling is typically in out rounds. We'll generally have 3-person panels, but sometimes bigger panels with one judge who is the chair and then 2 or more wings who do have votes, i.e. they could roll the chair if they both vote one way and the chair judge votes the other way. But judges will work together to come to a deliberation, to come to a call in those rounds and try to reach consensus. It doesn't always happen though. As the judge, especially if you are solo chairing in rounds, you have a few basic tasks in every round. You need to start the round. You need to call on debaters to give speeches. There are traditional APDA judging pleasantries that you can give if you want. This is kind of my soapbox. I really like them, and I tend to give them when I judge. They're not anything super crazy. They're just like, here, thanks for those eloquent remarks. I call upon the next speaker, insert whoever they are, to give the next speech of the round, not to exceed, like, say, 8 minutes, 30 seconds grace. I like them. I think they're fun to give. You don't have to give them. You can literally just be like, next speech. Cool, thanks. But like, you can give them if you want to. And you also probably should time speeches as the judge. A lot of judges don't. I like to. I think it's good. You can like put your hands up or type time if you're online, if speeches go over time. And it's also just like helpful to know how people are allocating time during their speech. It helps giving feedback. It helps sort of understanding where people are devoting time to different arguments, which can make it easier to judge. Cool. Some things you might encounter, or kind of the 3 Ps of APDA, some of which are a little weird if you haven't judged much APDA or you haven't done much debate before. First are POCs, which stands for points of clarification. These happen before the round in cases debate or during PMC off time for motions debate. They're not super relevant usually, and they're also kind of a dying art, but they can be relevant, so you probably should listen to them if they're happening, because they can establish clarifications that are relevant for the round. I wouldn't say like you need to sit there and flow them, but I would say pay attention to them as they're going on, have some idea in the back of your head of like what teams are agreeing to, just so you know as a judge, and if there becomes a debate later in the round, you at least have an understanding for yourself of what they were saying. POIs are points of information. They are not required in APDA, and they are also not a norm. You can judge a lot of APDA and never see a POI offered or taken. I very, very rarely even see them offered, and when they are offered, they are frequently just shut down. Do not penalize speakers for not taking or offering point of POIs. They're not relevant in APDA. It doesn't super matter. Some really old judges will care about them. I am old, I am not that old, and I think most people really don't care whether or not you take POIs. They can be helpful if teams want to give them for engagement. And certainly if a team offers one and the other team takes it and say responds to it well or responds to it poorly, feel free to factor that into your decision or your ranks or your speaks. But they're not a norm and not something you should expect to see all the time. Lastly, there are POOs, or points of order, which are called by the opposing team during a rebuttal speech to flag new arguments. As the judge, you should mark down what is being called new, and you should also give the other team a chance to respond and tell you where they have said that on the flow before, or what they think it's responding to, or if they think it's like new weighing or whatever their response is to it. Listen to it. I will never ever make a ruling on them when they are said. Like, I'll usually just be like, okay, cool, I'll take it under consideration. I get what you guys are calling. If you're totally confident it was in the round before, or you're totally confident it wasn't in the round and you want to say it was well taken or not well taken, go for it. I mean, sometimes it's relevant. If teams want a lean, you can also give a lean, but don't feel forced to, and you are more than welcome to be like, I will decide on this in deliberation, especially if it's something that requires a little more levels of thought than just like, it's a claim they did or didn't say it. How is APDA judged then? And some random APDA jargon that I think is relevant to talk about. First is the sort of concept of tabula rasa. This is a Latin phrase. It just means blank slate, but like essentially anything that's said in the APDA round that's not responded to becomes true for the round. And you are intended to judge APDA in a tabula rasa way. That is to say, there are no priors, there's no like sort of reasonability standard, and there's no outside knowledge for the round that exists. The only arguments that exist within the round and the only things which you should be voting on and evaluating are claims and arguments that debaters have made within the round. This is notably pretty different than a format like BP, where in the strictest version of APDA judging, if people claim something that you absolutely know 100% is not true, but they like explain it and the other team doesn't respond to it, it's just true for the round and you should take it as true for the round. Sometimes this is like really bothersome and really annoying, especially when people claim things that are like wildly out there that you know aren't true. But you should take it as true for the round if you want to be an APDA judge. And also, like, feel free to speak people lower for saying things that are absolutely absurd. Like, certainly this is something you can take into argument quality, but the argument is probably still true for the round. Next is sort of concept of on the flow, which I think is also sort of weird if you haven't judged a lot of APDA. It's essentially just saying, like, arguments exist on the flow. If they are not responded to, these arguments can be considered dropped and pulled through later in the round, which is why I have dropped arguments and pull throughs here. Basically just judging like what's on the flow, not arguments that you're adding or arguments that you like prior believe into the round, and just going with the arguments that debaters make on the flow rather than adding any sort of extra burdens to those. Lastly, is sort of concept of spec. It just means it's short for specific knowledge. It's essentially just saying that certain things are like outside the realm of like expected knowledge for debaters. Usually the standard that APDA uses is sort of front page of the New York Times, but like use your reasonable judgment about whether or not something is spec or not. And if you consider it spec, like it's usually pretty like if someone is stating statistics and someone else says, oh, that's spec. Yeah, maybe it is depending on how specific it is. Is it really relevant? I don't know, but people like to throw around like, oh, they're using spec. Oh, that argument's just spec. So it's just something you should be aware of as a term. Okay, you watched an entire round. You've hopefully been flowing the entire thing. Please flow when you judge. If you're not flowing when you judge, tell teams you're not going to flow. Do it equally across speeches, please. But the round has ended. You've watched and listened to the entire round. You've hopefully flowed the entire round. What do you do now? First, you should always kick debaters out of the room in person, or if you're on Discord or Zoom, kick them out of the call or like mute yourself and mute them, but don't like listen to them talk while you're giving a call. It's going to influence your decision in a lot of cases, and it's also just like weird optics. Don't do it. Kick them out or mute them and turn them off. Okay, you've done that. It's time to come to a call. Where are you starting here? I typically will start in op block and PMR, usually is where the most weighing is, or the clearest like creation of ballots will be in the round, and go from there. I.e., it's not super clear in op block, it's not super clear in PMR. Sure, go look at MG, go look at LOC, go back in the round and see what they've been arguing before then, if they have weighing in those speeches. But certainly the clearest weighing is usually going to be in the end of the round. From there, decide what matters the most to you. Easy ways to do this are like, what did teams weigh? If there's not clear weighing, and APDA has a real weighing problem recently, there's often not a lot of really clear weighing about what matters. What's a team spend time on? They spent time on a lot of things. What's intuitively the most important to you? Like if they have arguments about like helping minorities and they also have arguments about like, I don't know, like getting more money for some like random thing and they don't weigh either of these things, maybe the minorities are more important intuitively. I don't really know, right? I'm trying to think of an example that makes sense for this, but like if you're in a dumpster fire of around and there's like not weighing and they're not spending time on any one specific thing, just think to yourself like what's the reasonable thing here and do the best thing that you can with it. And at each step of this sort of process of like finding weighing, finding what you care about, thinking what's relevant, justify to yourself why you're using the framework you are. And the best way to do this is to look in the round. So if you're voting on something about getting money for a certain group and you say to yourself, okay, op tells me it's really important to get money for this group of people. Here's the framework they use. Here's how they lay it out. Here's why this is more robust weighing or more robust like framework creation than what Gov is telling me about their other impact that they have. And just think to yourself and have a reason of why you're voting on this, because this kind of cuts down on the like, well, I intuitively think this thing is important, but I'm not really sure what people in the round said. And the sort of wishy-washy RFD that feels like it didn't really hear the weighing in the round and it just kind of like picked an argument to vote on. This gets away from that, which will, one, make you a better judge, and two, will get away from like the, not, I don't want to say post-rounding because people shouldn't be post-rounding you, but we'll get away from like the weird dissatisfied thing people will do where they'll be like, well, why didn't you think about this argument? Or why didn't you vote on this argument, right? Gets out of that, makes you a better judge, also means people are just happier with the calls you're making because they're probably making more sense. Once you've decided then what matters in the round, it's time to figure out who's winning that clash and who's winning under the framework you've created for evaluating the round. I think the easiest way to do this is to start to trace the relevant arguments through the round, starting at the beginning of the round, i.e. look at what PMC and LOC said about these arguments. Look at if there were drop warrants or weighing on either side that win this clash. Sometimes they won't always be flagged by rebuttal speeches. A good PMR or op block should be flagging dropped warrants or dropped weighing for you, unless it's like super egregious, but they should probably be flagging it and saying, hey, here's the warranting we gave you that op didn't respond to. Here's why this wins the round for Gov, say in PMR. If they don't do that, sometimes you have to look through. I wouldn't like do their work for them, but I will look through and be like, okay, they make a bunch of warrants here. Op doesn't really respond to them. That's probably relevant. There often won't be clean drops in round, like especially in very good rounds. People aren't going to just drop like chunks of the flow for you to vote off of. In these cases, you can do a couple of things. I tend to look at strength of warrants to determine what I'm buying. So if someone has maybe one kind of not great warrant for their argument and someone else has like three like more in-depth, like fleshed out, real-world applicable warrants for their argument, I'm probably going to buy the team that warranted it better, even if there's nominally responses to those arguments, especially if those responses tend to get into the like, no, that's not true response, where it doesn't really like give a new warrant or give a counter warrant for something, it just sort of asserts something. I'm probably going to buy the team that has stronger warranting and look there just because it's better done, right? It has more warranting behind it. It's a clearer claim. It's easier to buy than someone just being like, no, that's not true. I don't know how compelling that is. So then, once I've decided who wins this sort of main clash that I care about, is winning that clash enough for this person to, or this team to win the round? It depends on what it is, right? Sometimes there are rounds where you have a singular clash that is super important, that both teams agree, this is really important, this is what we care about, this is where the judge is going to vote. And if one team wins that clash, one team is winning the round. Not all rounds are like that. A lot of them actually aren't. And I, as a judge, often end up voting on a combination of arguments or ballots rather than a single winning argument. Like if I've ever judged you, you probably heard me say something like, well, okay, Gov has like these three arguments which outweigh the sort of like one or two clashes that op is winning here. Because it's not usually as linear for me as like there's one big clash that everyone is winning under and we're just going to win under that. But you don't have to be a clone of me. If there's an argument or a clash that you feel is sufficiently weighed that it takes out the rest of the debate and you don't need to look at the rest of it, don't make your life easy. Like try to keep your deliberation as short as possible. Really, ideally, to make tab staff's lives easier, should probably be taking like 10 to 15 minutes max. And honestly, once you hit like 20 minutes, you're probably not adding anything meaningfully new to the round or to like your understanding of the round. You're probably making things up that you wish teams had said. Once you start hitting that 20-minute mark, make a call, go with your intuition, it's probably not going to get better. You're only going to confuse yourself more and get further away from the spirit of the round at that point. So I would not start taking into like 20, 25, 30 minutes to make calls, especially in rounds when it's just you judging. It's not worth it. Cool. You think you have a call. It's time to check your biases. When coming to a decision, the way I handle this is I will constantly ask myself, why am I not picking up the team that I'm dropping? Like, why am I not buying your argument? Why is their weighing not winning? Why do I not think this outweighs Gov? Why do I not think that they did what they needed to do? Like, what's missing from this? Why am I not voting on it? I think this is the easiest way to sort of think to yourself, is there something I'm missing? And sort of force yourself to check through those arguments. Because if you just say, okay, well, I know that op is winning, but you don't think about what the gov line was, you don't think about how they interact with each other, it's possible you're missing something. It's possible you're missing a warrant. It's possible you're missing some weighing on that argument. And it's possible you're doing the other team a disservice by not fully thinking through that argument. Secondly, and probably actually more importantly than this, you should try your absolute hardest to be mindful of other biases you have when judging, i.e., what is the gender of the speaker? What is the race of the speaker? These things should not matter to you when you are judging. Whether or not they are reppy should not matter to you. Plenty of times, Cody level teams have lost to first or second tournament novices legitimately on the flow. Do not be afraid to drop them to them. They'll probably be pissed at you, but they also probably lost the round, right? Like, do not be afraid to drop good teams to bad teams. Do not be afraid of people with certain school affiliations, right? Just because people go to a certain college or university does not make them better than other debaters. And sort of under this, APDA doesn't give wins or speaks or ranks based off of rhetoric or speaking style that people use. So just because you don't like the way that someone is speaking, or you don't think it's like particularly eloquent, does not matter for how you are giving speaks and how you are giving ranks and rounds. And you certainly should not be saying, well, this team sounded better, so I gave them the win. Yes, I have had judges say that. No, they should not be. People can make very compelling and very well-warranted arguments, even if they don't speak in a way that you consider to be pretty or rhetorically strong. Next steps. You have a call. You know who won the round. What are you doing with it? You need to give ranks and speaks. You need to submit a ballot, and you need to give honesty. Ranks are pretty simple. They're a little bit of a vibe check. Honestly, I'm going to be very for real with you, but they start at the 1, which is the best, to the 4, which is the worst. You rank individual speakers in the round, not teams. They are given based off of contributions to the round or contributions to the ballot. You can't give a low rank or low speak win. So the team that wins needs to, at best, win on a 1-4. They cannot win on a 2-4. They cannot win on a 3-4. If one person on the winning team is getting the 4, the other person has to get the 1. These aren't super common, but like split ranks probably should actually be more common. I think people have gotten very accustomed to just being like, okay, this team won 1-2. Who's the 1? Who's the 2? Which is like not great. Like certainly there are rounds where the other team actually might be the 2-3, but one person like pulled something out in the PMR, so they're the 1, but like the MG was the 4, and that just happens. They're pretty vibey, right? Like sometimes I think to myself, who contributed like the argument that I am voting on the clearest, or on the team that lost, like who got the closest to a winning ballot? Maybe they're the 2, maybe they're the 3, but or maybe even they're the 1 and the other team won on a 2-3, right? And I just think about like, what was I voting on? What arguments were relevant? Who made them? And sort of what was the quality of arguments that each speaker was delivering? Then once I have ranks, you have to give speaks. I typically start, I'll talk more about speaks in the next slide, 2 slides, I don't remember, but I typically start with the best speaker and I decide what I think they got, and then I work down from there in the round. You can really do it any way you want as long as you're giving everyone speaks. The range is 15 to 38. I'll talk more about this later. Submit your ballot before you give a call to debaters. Always, always, always. I have tabbed a lot of tournaments. I am in tab. I will come yell at you if you do this. Other people are in tab. They will also come yell at you if you do not do this. Submit your ballot on NU tab, assuming we are using NU tab still at the indefinite points in the future when people watch this lecture. It's like broken and horrible and failing, but I love it and will cling to it with my last breath. Submit your ballot to NU tab. Use your ballot code. There's a button on the front page that says submit a ballot. You enter your code. It pops up with a ballot. Enter what team won. Enter ranks and speaks for them. Hit submit. If you fuck it up, NU tab should not let you submit it. Sometimes it does anyway. It should not let you submit it And if you have a problem, like contact tab of whatever tournament you're judging, but this should be pretty simple. Finally, the RFD, or the reason for decision, is given to teams verbally after deliberation is over. Unlike some other formats like BP, APDA does have RFDs given directly to teams in out rounds. We do not announce calls in GA like BP does. So even if you are judging an out round, if you are chairing, expect to give an RFD to your teams. Do not just expect to have to give a call. Expect to give an explanation for that call as well. Let's talk about the speaker scale a little bit more in depth. The speaker scale goes 15 to 38. Higher speaks are better. There are no low point wins, as I said before. And there are also justification bars. Anything 17 or below and 36 and above has to be justified to a member of tab. If it's like higher, so it's like a 37, it has to be justified to 2 members of tab, etc. These justifications are not super common. There's like, if you're watching a speech and you're like, this is the best speech of the tournament, unquestionably, this is like one of the best speeches I've given ever, and you can articulate your reasoning for that, feel free to justify it. But like, justifications aren't super common. I would not go into a tournament expecting to justify someone. I judged probably almost 100 rounds this past year, and I justified one speaker out of all of those rounds. It's not super common. A 29 is considered the average on the speaker scale, with tournament top speakers probably averaging somewhere around a 32 or a 33. I think this might actually be low, and I might be aging myself by saying this because speech inflation has gotten really, really bad. But if we're giving like a 33 or a 34, that's a really good speak. That person did really well. They were a really good debater. Speech inflation is kind of crazy. Try to not give into it, please. But also, like, it is what it is, right? There is a speaker scale written out with categories for each number of speaks, and you can find it at the link I linked in this presentation. It lays out what each number on the scale represents, and you should read it and refer to it while giving speaks. It is actually very clear and well written, unlike the old speaker scale, because Matt rewrote it and it's good now. So I would actually advise reading it, unlike the old scale where I was like, it's like kind of a vibe. Like maybe don't read it. It might confuse you. You should actually read this one. It's pretty good. It's pretty helpful to like standardize the way that we're giving speaks, and more people should read it so that we can do things like fight back against the crazy speaks inflation. Cool. RFD creation. How do you give an APDA RFD? It's up to individual style. There's not really like a right or wrong way to do it. But a good RFD will include a couple things pretty across the board. Who won or lost? This should be one of the first things you say. Do not be the judge who gets like 5 minutes into talking and seems like, who won? Who lost? And they like can't figure it out. It kind of sucks for your teams. I get the impulse. I have many rounds where I'm like, I want to yap about the round. And that's cool, but like give a call first and then yap about the round because it just kind of sucks for people if you don't. It should include relevant arguments in the round. It should include what arguments you are voting on and why you voted on those arguments. The way that I structure my RFDs is typically as follows. Feel free to steal it. Feel free to adapt it. Feel free to do it however you want. I typically say who won. Then I will give thoughts on the round if I have anything that's like super top level important. So if I want to talk about like the topic of case, or I want to talk about like an issue or a good thing that both teams did, it goes right here and I'll say it right at the top. I'll usually summarize the main clash for the main important arguments in the round. I will give the best version of the losing team's arguments and explain why I'm not voting on them. And then I'll give an explanation of what I did vote on from the winning team and why it beats the sort of best case of the other team. I will also usually, it's not on the slides, I'll usually offer to give feedback. Feel free to if people want it and you want to give it, but there is certainly no obligation for you to give feedback, and you should never feel like you are being pressured to do so. But if you have things that you think would be insightful to say to debaters, feel free to be like, hey, does anyone want feedback? I wouldn't offer feedback unsolicited because sometimes it doesn't come off super well. I know it's frequently well-intentioned, but sometimes it just doesn't come off super well if you're just like, here's some things you could do, and the other person's kind of like, okay, thanks. But like if you ask, most people are super willing to take feedback, and that's a really good way to be helpful. Okay, bonus. And then I think this is my last slide, and then I will be done. Theory lightning round of what to do when the round does not go as normal. So that was a very normal round that happened that we could judge, right? That was the explanation of everything goes right. Nothing weird happens. Both teams debate. They have a good time. No one has anything weird that they do or things that go wrong. That is not how all rounds go. That's how the majority of rounds go, but that is not how all rounds go. That's theory lightning round for some of the other shit you might see. First is the tight call. This is cases only. If someone tight calls a motion, feel free to auto drop them. Motions aren't tight. They're not. They were set by CA teams. They do not need to be tight called. In cases, an op team might tight call the gov team. This is essentially saying there are no winning arguments that we could have made on op in this round. We think case, therefore, is tight. In tight calls, tightness becomes the sole voting issue. Usually, sometimes people run different theory, but we seem to have reached a place where a lot of tab policy will say tightness becomes a sole voting issue when a case is tight called. So sort of teams sides essentially flip. Gov will argue why case is not tight, i.e. potential arguments op could have made. Op will argue the gov side, i.e. why they could not have beaten case and why it is so strong that it is tight. And round goes from there. You can usually judge them pretty on the flow. Sometimes you can't. If they're really like a dumpster fire, you can kind of use your best discretion there. Spec calls typically are not made to entire cases. They are typically in response to specific arguments, and they say the argument is outside the realm of reasonable knowledge that teams could be expected to have, so they can't engage with it. You can use your discretion on them. Usually it's sort of a question of like, do you think the argument is actually too specky? Do you think it's actually something a team could have responded to? Don't be afraid to be like, guys, this argument's not spec. It will sometimes bother teams if you have to do it, but like sometimes people will spec call things that they should know and they just don't. So they say, this is spec. You can use your discretion and say, it's not, I'm going to take the argument. If you do buy the spec call, you can drop the argument from your flow. That's usually the easiest way to handle it and usually what the theory tells you to do. Equity theory. Personal paradigms on this will very much differ. Equity theory is essentially any theory that takes like an in-round or sometimes out-of-round equity violation and turns it into a theory argument. It usually looks like either drop the argument because it's inequitable, sometimes it's drop the team because the argument is inequitable. Use your discretion to find the best solution for both teams. Sometimes it's not the equity theory. I have a lot of personal thoughts on this, so feel free to reach out to me about them, but it can become really kind of a mess and end up with a lot of people's feelings hurt. So just try to like find the solution that is best. You won't see it super often, but I feel like it has been on a bit of a rise recently. And there has been like a little bit of a rise of just like equity related or equity adjacent theory that exists. So worst case, like reach out to a tournament equity officer, reach out to tab staff and ask them their opinion and go from there. Talk a little bit about critiques or Ks. They're like quote unquote progressive arguments. I'll just put that silence there. Borrowed from American high school debate. I think they're terrible for APDA. You won't see me say a nice thing about them. I think they should be auto dropped. I will not give any further defense of Ks, but feel free to do with them what you will as a judge. Other theory, it probably doesn't need to be run, right? There's like a lot of random weird theory people can write about. They can say literally anything, right? People have run like disclosure theory about cases. People have run like anti-dino theory. If you ask me, it probably doesn't need to be run. It can be handled out around or on the forum or like or just by talking to people like any other way. But if you like theory more than me, feel free to evaluate it and run with it, right? There are some judges and some debaters who really like theory and think it's really like a good part of debate that we should encourage more. If you're one of those people, feel free to evaluate like other weird theory. I just personally won't, and it might be something you want to check with your judge about because there are some of us who do not like it. On that positive note, thank you all for watching. If you have judging questions, feel free to DM me, Katrina Hoteling, on Facebook, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you all for watching. Good luck judging. Have fun, whatever tournament you're judging at.